Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Margaret Mims from the Department of Learning and Interpretation here at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. Today, we celebrate the opening of the exhibition Icons of Style, A Century of Fashion Photography. The exhibition was organized by Paul Martineau, who is one of the photography curators at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and was on view at the Getty in the summer and the early fall of last year. Here in Houston, Malcolm Daniel, the Gus and Linda Wortham Curator of Photography, Lisa Volpe, Associate Curator of Photography, and Mariana Real, the Curatorial Assistant for Photography, in short, the entire curatorial team, have reshaped the exhibition that was at the Getty in several significant ways. Just to name a few for you, so you'll look for them as you go through the exhibition. They replaced about half of the 200 photographs that were in the Getty exhibition with works from our own museum's massive photography collection, and with a few loans from the Houston Public Library and other sources. Where the Getty exhibition was organized by decades, for example, you move from the 1910s to the 20s to the 30s, the 40s, you get it. The exhibition here in Houston encompasses more than a century of photography, but the curatorial team organized the exhibition by themes. Some are related to art historical movements like Art Deco or Surrealism or pop art. Others are related to photographic techniques, and still others focus on the social and the cultural changes reflected in fashion photography. They also added 16 couture outfits from our museum's collection of textiles and costume that reflect the themes of the different sections of the exhibition. And most importantly, I think, they made a very concerted and conscious effort to create an exhibition that is more inclusive, more reflects Houston's expansive diversity. But the bottom line, I think, in all of those decisions was that the photographs added should be great photographs, not just great fashion, to emphasize that the exhibition is a century of fashion photography and not an illustrated history of fashion. As curator Malcolm Daniel emphasized, and I quote, "You can't look at these images and think that the photographers weren't considering themselves artists. They're so self-consciously artistic," end quote. The photographs in the exhibition were made for consumption in magazines and advertising, a world in which the photographer is constantly challenged to hold our attention, because what holds our attention is constantly changing in the face of social, political, and economic forces. So in that environment of rapid change, how does an image become an icon? An image that continues to capture our imagination, to linger in our memory long after it was made. That question is our focus this afternoon. One photographer, one image, the photograph Richard Avedon made in 1955 of model Dovima with 2 elephants. To take us deep inside the making, the context, and the continuing legacy of one of history's most iconic fashion photographs, I am delighted to welcome this afternoon as our speaker, Lisa Volpe, Associate Curator of Photography here at the museum. Before Lisa joined the photography staff at our museum in January of 2017, she served as curator at the Wichita Art Museum, a role in which she oversaw all areas of the Wichita Art Museum's collection. Before that, she held various curatorial roles at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art and was awarded fellowships at the LA County Museum of Art and the Cleveland Museum of Art. Here in Houston, she's already curated a wonderful variety of exhibitions. With Dina Woodall, Associate Curator of Prints and Drawings, she organized the exhibition 40 Years of Discovery, Gifts of Clint Willauer, last year, which showcased the enormous impact this one art lover and collector has had and continues to have on the works on paper collections here at our museum. In spring 2018, she brought us Modernism on the Ganges, the photographs of Raghavir Singh, an exhibition presented in conjunction with the museum's major exhibition that same spring, Peacock in the Desert, the Royal Arts of Jodhpur, India. She's curated several of the ongoing rotations of the exhibition, A History of Photography, on the walls adjacent to the museum's cafe. These are exhibitions I'm sure all of you have seen coming or going from the cafe or the garage that plumb the many stories of the history of photographer, but also allow the photography curators to showcase the immense depth and breadth of our museum's photography collection. This summer, her primary focus is the exhibition Icons of Style, a Century of Fashion Photography, our focus today. But she's also deeply involved in organizing the exhibition Shooting the Moon, photographs from the museum's collection celebrating 50 years after Apollo 11, which opens in July, and exhibitions in the planning stages for the future, including an exhibition 2 or 3 years from now of the photographs made by artists we know as a painter, Georgia O'Keeffe. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Volpe as our speaker as she talks about making an icon. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. I've been joking that today you're going to learn everything you ever wanted to know and more than you ever wanted to know about Richard Avedon's Dovima with elephants, but I just wanted to take a moment to discuss why we're here today, certainly. And that is the opening of our wonderful summer exhibition, Icons of Style, a Century of Fashion Photography. Icons of Style celebrates the intersection of fashion and photography, and it explores the multitude of forms and meanings in fashion photography over the past 100+ years. And it celebrates all the artistic possibilities and the stylistic virtuosity explored by talented photographers who've worked under the broad umbrella of fashion. Of course, none of this is ever possible without our incredible lenders here in Houston and elsewhere, our donors, River Oaks District, Luther King Capital Management, and Dior, and our whole museum team, and I give my sincere thanks. We're thrilled with the response to the exhibition so far, and we hope that you will be equally thrilled when you see it upstairs. And I also hope that after this lecture, you look at one of our most iconic icons with a new appreciation. We've set it off in a little alcove in what we are lovingly referring to as our chapel to the goddess Dovima. In 1955, when this photograph was made, Dovima, here sporting a black and white evening gown designed by Yves Saint Laurent for Christian Dior, was the most elegant and highest paid fashion model in Paris. And Richard Avedon was the most influential and highest paid fashion photographer, which, with such impressive credentials behind its formation, it makes sense then that the resulting photo, full title, Dovima with Elephants, Evening Dress by Dior, Cirque de Versailles, Paris, is one of the most famous fashion photographs of all time. But how exactly did this shot come together? How was this iconic image made? And I'm not talking merely about the photographic setup or technique, but rather the who, what, when, where, and especially why. Avedon himself would encourage us to look closely at the photograph for answers. He once said, "My photographs don't go below the surface. I have great faith in surfaces. A good one is full of clues." This afternoon, we'll follow the clues in Dovima with Elephants, diving into the people, places, and passions that brought the work into being. And it's a story as engaging as the photograph that includes tap dancing, 2 young artists, 3 lovers of performance and theater, paper dolls, 3 Hollywood films, 4 elephants, and even the trapeze. This storm of circumstance or spirit, or what some might call zeitgeist, came together on an August day in 1955 to make an icon. So let's begin with the man only suggested in the photograph, the director behind the camera, Richard Avedon. Avedon was born in 1923 in New York City, the son of Russian Jewish parents, Jacob and Anna Avedon. And while Richard was his given name, he was always known by family and friends as Dick. Dick grew up surrounded by fashion and design. Avedon's father owned a women's specialty clothing store on Fifth Avenue, and Dick was often present when representatives from upscale fashion magazines such as Harper's Bazaar and Vogue visited each month to discuss couture. When Avedon was 7 years old, his father bought him a Kodak Brownie camera, and from the moment he opened the box, he began taking pictures. He brought the camera with him everywhere. and soon advanced to paying people he met on the street to pose for him, a nickel or a dime at a time. But his favorite subject was his sister Louise, and you see two of his earliest photos of Louise here. Dick also spent a fair amount of time in front of the lens. His mother, Anna, encouraged him to perform for the camera, and her favorite performance was one of an upper-class son. She posed Dick in front of fancy homes, ideally with a luxury car in the driveway, and she would even borrow pedigreed dogs for the shot. He would return to those roots in later photographs, including this one with his second wife, Evelyn, and a borrowed pug puppy. The type of aspirational images Anna Avedon created would lay the foundation for Dick's career. As writer Owen Edwards would later point out, fashion work is by definition borrowed dogs. The dress is borrowed, the model is borrowed, the situation is borrowed. Avedon often literally borrowed dogs in his work as he moved along in his career. Here, he borrowed an Afghan hound and the Balenciaga suit and hat for this image of Dovima, also taken in Paris in 1955. Anna Avedon taught the young Dick this type of aspirational performance in other ways. Unable to afford theater tickets, Anna and young Dick would dress in their worst clothes and appeal to ticket takers and ushers of Broadway for empty seats. Similarly, he and cousin Margie would take their grandparents' clothes. She preferred big movie star glasses and a fox cape, while Dick wrapped a fine wool scarf around himself, and the two would ride the New York bus, imagining themselves as glamorous people. Avedon noted, I could never in a million years have grown up to be me if I had let my exhibitionism be inhibited when I was a kid. Every Easter and Christmas, Avedon's parents would take him and his sister to a Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire movie at Radio City Music Hall. Avedon noted, Fred Astaire was my hero from the time I was 9. One Easter, at the conclusion of Follow the Fleet, the 9-year-old Dick got up from his seat and did his best impression of his hero. With his best Astaire moves, which he continued to demonstrate throughout his life, Dick tap danced up the aisle, blowing kisses to the appreciative audience. While his father was mortified, his mother praised his efforts and encouraged his flair for the dramatic. Every summer for the next few years, Avedon continued to perfect his tap dance routine at summer camps, performing to a confused audience of his peers at the talent show that signaled the conclusion of camp. Despite their often lukewarm and, at one point in his teens, mocking reactions, Avedon continued to embrace dancing. He just left behind his public tap dancing and instead incorporated body movement into his other passion, photography. While his passion for photography was kindled with the brownie he received at age 7, he continued to photograph, advancing to simple 35mm equipment. At the age of 12, he joined the Young Men's Hebrew Association Camera Club and began to learn the techniques of the darkroom. As he learned more, he became more and more invested in the art form. In high school, he was a terrible student. His grades at the prestigious DeWitt Clinton High School were miserable because his mind wandered into fantasy and image making rather than remaining on the subject at hand. He enjoyed, however, editing his school's literary and art magazine alongside the soon-to-be famous American novelist James Baldwin. An uninterested student, Avedon only attended 1 year of college. Instead of finishing a 4-year degree, he took a job in the darkroom at a small photo studio. When one of the studio owners enlisted in the Merchant Marine and was assigned to set up a photo department, Avedon enlisted too. Avedon's father gave him a notable farewell present, a Rolleiflex twin-lens camera. This camera would be his tool of choice for most of his fashion and portrait work until the late 1960s. As photographers mate second class, Avedon made portraits of sailors for their military identification cards using his own camera. Avedon described his experience as prophetic, explaining, "I must have taken pictures of 100,000 faces before it occurred to me I was becoming a photographer." Many historians have noted that this is where he got his trademark style, a close-up depiction of his subject against a white background. It is a simplified style that creates maximum impact, as is evident in this 1960 photograph of Dick Hickok. After the end of World War II, Avedon returned home with plans to become a professional photographer. He convinced the hugely influential art director for Harper's Bazaar, Alexei Brodovich, to let him study photography at the design laboratory of the New School of Social Research. Brodovich taught his young pupil that it was the photographer's responsibility to be creative and to bring fresh ideas to the shoot, regardless of the subject matter. His dictum was simple: if you look in your camera and see something you've seen before, don't click the shutter. The mentor-pupil relationship between Brodovich and Avedon ultimately transformed into a loyal and supportive friendship. In 1944, Avedon married Doe Noel, who was struggling to become a model. And in an effort to support his new family, Avedon dressed in his Merchant Marine uniform, lugging a portfolio of photos of Doe, and peddled his photographic services to advertising companies around New York. Soon, one of his images appeared on a press release from Bonwit Teller, and he was paid $7.50 for his services. It was his first official job. Meanwhile, Avedon's photographs of his wife had made it to the desk of newly appointed Vogue art director Alexander Lieberman, who called the Avedon household offering Dick a job. Despite his completely empty bank account, he turned down the offer. Instead, after hanging up the phone, Dick tucked his portfolio under his arm and walked into the Harper's Bazaar office. He had his heart set on his images going to his mentor, Alexei Brodovich, at Harper's. And though he had tried to present his work to Brodovich on many occasions, on that day, the famed editor agreed to take a look, and Brodovich decided to give him a chance. A small assignment with no promises. Avedon rose to the occasion. Dick took models to Jones Beach and photographed them playing in the sand. Brodovich hailed the photographs as a breath of fresh air and ran them in the magazine. Thus, with the help of Brodovich, Avedon was hired by Harper's Bazaar, joining the staff as its youngest photographer. Dick quickly made a name for himself by taking pictures of moving models with expressive gestures, rather than reproducing the static poses that were common at the time. He placed his models in settings ranging from streets to cafes to casinos. From the mid-40s until the early 50s, Brodovich filled the pages of Harper's with Avedon's images. Avedon grew artistically at Harper's and also grew close to his co-workers. He noted, "Brodovich became my professional father, Carmel Snow my mother, and Diana Vreeland my fairy godmother." Surrounded by this love, support, and fashion magic, it's only natural that Avedon's wishes began to come true. In 1947, he reached a benchmark in his career when he was asked to accompany Harper's editor, Carmel Snow, to Paris to photograph Christian Dior's second groundbreaking show. For the next several years, he continued as the photographer of choice for Harper's, capturing the latest Paris fashions. Working with Snow and fashion editor Diana Vreeland, Avedon created challenging and captivating photographs, including Dovima with elephants, during one of his Parisian trips in 1955. His star was rising quickly. It rose so high, in fact, that 1 year after Dovima with elephants, Avedon found himself working with his childhood hero, Fred Astaire, for the film Funny Face. In Funny Face, Fred Astaire plays a fashion photographer based, of course, on Avedon, and he's named Dick Avery. Get it? Richard Avedon, Dick Avery. And Audrey Hepburn stars as the model he catapults to stardom and then falls in love with. It was based on Avedon's relationship with his, by then, former wife and model Doe. Hepburn would become a new muse for Avedon, but the true pleasure was working with Astaire. The photographer noted, "I learned to be me by pretending to be him, and then I had to teach him how to pretend to be me." Avedon actually received screen credit as a visual consultant and for the main title backgrounds. A number of Avedon photographs appear during the opening credits and during the Think Pink musical number. The photograph of Audrey Hepburn that convinces Astaire she has supermodel potential, which he's holding here, as well as being used in the movie's posters, was also Avedon's. And if the film Funny Face fictionalized the greatest fashion photographer in the world, it is only reasonable that the greatest model at the time should similarly be caricatured. And no, I'm not talking about model Susie Parker, who appears in the film's early Think Pink number with a swirling tube of pink toothpaste, but Dovima. Dovima was one of the world's most famous fashion models when she appeared at the beginning of Funny Face playing the role of, well, one of the world's most famous fashion models. She's the striking, statuesque figure that poses in the bookstore. In Funny Face, Dovima is Marion, the aggressively non-intellectual model who reads comic books in a bookstore dedicated to philosophy, and eventually gets upstaged by Hepburn. Again, fiction followed fact. According to Avedon, Dovima brought a steamer trunk full of comic books along on a shoot in Africa. In her defense, Dovima missed most of her childhood, and in her modeling career lived a life of fantasy worthy of any comic. Dovima, born Dorothy Virginia Margaret Juba in 1927, the daughter of a Polish-American policeman and his Irish-born wife. She was raised in Jackson Heights, Queens, and by all accounts, she had a normal childhood until age 10. At 10, she contracted rheumatic fever, and she spent the next 7 years confined to her home, the first entire year confined to her bed. Taught by tutors and with no other children around, she concocted the name Dovima herself. It was her alter ego, her imaginary friend, invented during a lonely childhood. The name incorporated the first 2 letters of each of her names, Dorothy, Virginia, Margaret. Dorothy, as herself and as Dovima, would play paper dolls and act out thrilling adventures in her bedroom. In this way, Dovima's childhood, like Avedon's, was filled with fantasy and personal performances. Isolated with no comparisons to draw upon, Dovima never really thought about her appearance. Only later she would note, "As a child, I was a gangly, skinny thing, and I had this ugly front tooth that I broke when I was playing dress-up in my mother's clothes." Yet Dovima's tragic childhood is simply the proper beginning to her fairy tale modeling career. She was walking out of an automat in 1949 with her first husband, Jack Golden, when a woman asked her if she had ever been a fashion model. The woman said she worked for Vogue magazine and invited her to have some test photographs made. The next day, Dovima was photographed by Irving Penn. She kept her mouth closed during the shoot because of that bad tooth, and the resulting photo had a mysterious look that reminded those who saw it of the Mona Lisa. Her career had begun. Within 1 year, she was one of the most popular models at the Ford Model Agency, where she made $30 an hour when the other leading models made $25. By the end of her career, she was reportedly up to $60 an hour, earning her the nickname the $1-a-minute girl. And she had graced the covers of fashion magazines more than 500 times. In the post-war decade that celebrated luxury, maturity, and elegance, Dovima stood out above the rest. Though her career began with a shot by Irving Penn, Dovima worked frequently and perhaps best with Richard Avedon. She later commented that the two of them became like Siamese twins, with me knowing what he wanted before he explained it. He asked me to do extraordinary things, but I always knew I was going to be part of a great picture. Despite his often strange or taxing requests, Dovima would comply, and Richard Avedon called her the most remarkable and unconventional beauty of her time. It is true that with her refined elegance, Dovima ruled the fashion world, at least until 1962-63, when at the ridiculously young age of 35, she quit modeling forever, explaining, "I didn't want to wait until the camera turned cruel." Now, if age 35 seems rather young for retirement, then I would remind you that this story takes place in the world of fashion, where youth reigns. Youth is also a theme in the story of Yves Saint Laurent, who at the young age of 21 found himself the head of the famous House of Dior, following the death of its namesake. Just as Richard Avedon's theater and fashion-infused childhood is now viewed as foreshadowing of his future photographic style, Saint Laurent seems similarly destined for his famed career as a fashion designer. Born on August 1st, 1936 in Algeria, Saint Laurent spent his childhood drawing. Like Avedon, his creativity initially found an outlet in theater, which he discovered when he saw Molière's School for Wives in 1950. The costumes were a revelation for the young man, who began designing sets and costumes for paper dolls for the theater. He eventually began using the silhouettes of his favorite models, which he cut out of his mother's fashion magazines. Saint Laurent was creating his own models in much the same way Avedon created characters in front of his mother's camera, or the way Dovima created her alter ego and imagined their adventures. In his teens, Saint Laurent left paper dolls behind and graduated to designing and sewing dresses for his mother and sisters. And at the age of 17, he moved to Paris and enrolled at the Chambre Syndicale de Haute Couture, a prestigious French school offering world-renowned couture classes. In that year, 1953, Saint Laurent submitted 3 sketches to a contest for young fashion designers organized by the International Wool Secretariat. Despite a large number of entries and stiff competition, Saint Laurent won 3rd place, beating out his friend and future designer Fernando Sanchez and some young German student named Karl Lagerfeld. We know nothing about him. Subsequently, he was invited to attend the awards ceremony held in Paris. And during his stay there, Saint Laurent, through a large chain of contacts, was introduced to Christian Dior. The young Saint Laurent showed the couturier his designs, and Dior hired him on the spot. Although Dior recognized his talent immediately, Saint Laurent spent his first year at the House of Dior on mundane tasks, such as decorating the studio. In his second year, 1955, he was allowed to submit sketches for the couture collection, and he submitted the black gown with the long white sash that would be worn by Dovima. With every passing season, more of his sketches were accepted by Dior, until in October of 1957, Dior died unexpectedly at a health spa in northern Italy of a massive heart attack. But he had already chosen a successor, the young Yves Saint Laurent. Consequently, in 1957, Saint Laurent, at age 21, became the head designer of the House of Dior. With the fall fashion previews mere months away, the young designer found himself in an impossible position, and so he dealt with the pressure by returning to his roots, theater. When Christian Dior died, he wrote, "The chance to create my own collections pushed me to set aside my projects to work in the theater." In essence, he ran away to the circus. Saint Laurent took in all sorts of theatrical productions, including one that had particular meaning for him in his new role, the circus. Visiting the circus not only rekindled his childhood discovery of costume and fashion, but also connected him to his mentor. It is well known that Christian Dior would often take his apprentices to Cirque d'Hiver. It seems likely that Saint Laurent found inspiration at that circus, where the flying trapeze was said to have been introduced. For when he presented his first collection for Christian Dior, he named it the Trapeze Collection. Like Saint Laurent and Christian Dior before him, many great artists found their inspiration at Cirque du Verre while watching the astounding human and animal performances, notably Henri Toulouse-Lautrec and Georges Seurat. Cirque du Verre is a stunning structure. The ornate 20-sided venue opened in 1852, just outside the Marais district in Paris, where it served as the city's primary circus theater until just a few decades later. It was originally christened Cirque Napoleon, but it was given its current seasonal name in 1870 to differentiate it from the similar venues which were built. The building was constructed to house circus performances with its high ceiling and circular structure, but within 5 years, it had quickly become a popular venue for numerous events: wrestling, dressage, and other equestrian demonstrations, fashion shows and classical music concerts, and even demonstrations on ice. Cirque du Verre was also utilized as a cinema, and notably a location for the second Hollywood film that factors into our tale, Carol Reed's Trapeze. The plot is simple and a bit silly, if I can say so. It's essentially a moody love triangle with a circus background. Starring Burt Lancaster, Tony Curtis, and Gina Lollobrigida, the film was shot in 1955 at Cirque du Verre. It was Gina Lollobrigida's first American-made film, and it should be noted that Gina Lollobrigida was not only a model and actress, but also a photographer in her own right. Here she is with some of her prints. Burt Lancaster, as a young man, actually worked as an acrobat in the circus and wanted to make a movie about that career. Lancaster acted as producer on the film and hired a trapeze artist to train the actors and to help make the film as authentic as possible. And it would be the first film for these guys. The elephants: Jumbo, Tarzan, Lulu, and Baby. If you don't recognize them, that's okay, but those are the same elephants that would share fashion fame with Dovima. Here they are again in a 1957 television special. Outside of the lackluster plot of Trapeze, the visuals and much of the camera work is stunning. In fact, while I was in my office getting screenshots of this film for this presentation, curatorial assistant Laura Minton saw my screen and commented, "It looks like a magazine came to life." I didn't prompt her to say that, I promise. But that might have been just what Richard Avedon was thinking when he visited the set of the film. Avedon was invited by a friend working on the production crew to visit Cirque du Verre during the filming of Trapeze. He was already in Paris with Carmel Snow producing a report of the season's Paris fashions. And though not looking specifically for a location to shoot his fashion images, Avedon noted, "I saw the elephants under an enormous skylight, and in a second I knew." Avedon's theatrical style was a perfect match for such a setting. From his youth, he had been enthralled with two things, fashion and spectacle, and his mom had often borrowed locations and animals for their family photos. He just did the same in his fashions. So in August of 1955, these disparate threads combined. The 32-year-old Avedon, who had grown up loving theater and photography, brought Dovima, who had grown up fantasizing, to Cirque du Verre to model dresses for Dior by Yves Saint Laurent, another lover of theater and fantasy, who had often visited that performance venue with his mentor Dior. Does everyone follow? And while film production for Trapeze was on hold, Avedon began to direct his shots. There were several versions of Dovima with elephants. In this first shot, Dovima is dressed in a white silk dress and cape by Givenchy. Her co-stars are a clown, a monkey, Amélie Bouillon, the son of the family that owned and managed the circus troupe housed at Cirque d'Hiver. In the background, of course, linger the elephants. Though the photograph is undeniably well done, the scene lacks cohesion. It's not clear what Dovima is doing in this strange location, what she is doing, and let alone why she's wearing couture doing it. One can assume that Avedon wasn't pleased either. This is the only known frame that includes the clown, Emilian, and the monkey, and while there are 9 frames of Dovima just with the elephants. Changing out of the Givenchy, Dovima donned another white dress, this one designed by Dior. In the frame, Dovima seems to direct the elephants. With her left arm raised and her wrist flicked upward, she leads the 2 elephants into a choreographed dance that might rival Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Sorry, I'm gonna get another drink. Here, the fantasy is clear. Beauty taming the beast. Dovima's role and clothing begin to work with the story brought to life in this photo, not against it. Yet again, one can assume that Avedon wasn't completely satisfied with what he saw, and again, only one negative with Dovima in the white Dior dress was used. In contrast, there are 8 frames of Dovima with the elephants in the black Dior evening gown. Notably, this was the only one of the 3 dresses brought to the shoot that was designed by the young Yves Saint Laurent. There was something about that dress that made the whole work come together. Perhaps Saint Laurent's youthful energy and ambition were part of its perfect folds. Perhaps the youthful theatrical fantasies that inspired it spoke both to Dovima and to Avedon, both performers with a love for fantasy, and so they found the additional inspiration that was needed. What is certain is that Avedon found Dovima's change of dress so compelling that he shot 8 frames. In each of the surviving 8x10 contact sheets, we see Dovima posed elegantly between elephants Tarzan and Jumbo, her outstretched form in balletic harmony with the lumbering chained beasts. Yet in all of these images, Dovima is hiding her true feelings behind her elegant facade. The elephant shoot was the most terrifying moment for me because I just had to trust that things would turn out all right, she would later recall. Yes, the elephants were chained, but her fear was not without reason. The Cirque d'Hiver house elephants were a feisty lot. The herd once escaped while the circus was on tour, rampaging through a small European town. And they also had a close call with famed opera singer Maria Callas. According to legend, if circus manager Joseph Bouillon was around women other than his wife, the elephants would become agitated. Maria was almost trampled. With Mr. Bouillon safely hidden away, Dovima triumphed over her fears, helping Avedon to create a fantastic and compelling image. And I want to linger on this shot just for a moment more, for its very existence is too enticing to just pass by. This behind the scenes, after the shoot snapshot shows Avedon kissing a relieved-looking Dovima dressed in that black Yves Saint Laurent dress with the elephants behind her. Though the photographer of this snap is unknown, it seems clear that they were aware some sort of magic had just occurred, and they sought to preserve that moment in a photograph. The magic appeared again on the magazine page when less than a month later, Dovima with elephants appeared as a one spread, in a 14-page story on Paris fashion published in the September 1955 issue of Harper's Bazaar. Both the white and black Dior dresses appeared under the title Dior's Sinuous Evening Line. But our Dovima, the iconic Dovima in the black Dior by Yves Saint Laurent, commanded that spread. That photo, of course, is stunning. Dovima stands centered between the elephants, Tarzan and Jumbo, arms extended, head high, and body gracefully arched. I would suggest everyone try and, at home, mimic that posture. It does make you feel quite elegant. The bulk and lumbering movements of the elephants serve to emphasize the model's elegance and the beauty of her dress. The rough straw underfoot and the toughness of the elephant's skin contrasts with the richness of the fabric and the silk of the white sash. Avedon's photographic fantasy suggests that in this kind of dress, any beast, physical or metaphorical, could be tamed. After the publication of the photograph in 1955, Avedon moved on. He continued to enjoy his reign as one of the most famous fashion photographers, a position ratified by Funny Face in 1957, but Avedon soon tired of the fashion world, and he collaborated with his old high school friend James Baldwin on a book of powerful prose and portraits titled Nothing Personal from 1964. And he also began his politically motivated large-scale mural work, including this incredible 3-panel piece, each panel measuring 121 by 81 inches, depicting the Chicago 7, which I'm proud to say is a recent museum acquisition. Also a recent acquisition is the MFAH's own print of Dovima, measuring an incredible 50 by 40 inches. It was a gift of Karen Kelsey Duddleston in honor of MFAH's former curator of photography, Ann Wilkes Tucker, on the occasion of her retirement, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have it in the collection. It is one of 50 40 by 50 prints made by Avedon in the late 70s. By that time, Avedon's reputation as one of the best American photographers, not just fashion, but photography generally, was secured, and he began to revisit his past work for sale for the newly emerging photographic market. It's interesting to note that Avedon claimed to have, quote, lost the negative for Dovima in the white dress and only produced prints of this Dovima. Whether it is the truth or whether it is the artist forcibly editing his work for the public, we might never know. But we do know that by the time Avedon was printing this version of Dovima with elephants for public sale, it was already iconic. Yes, it reflected an important moment in fashion history. The artist had captured Dovima, one of the last great models of the sophisticated mold, as she beautifully displayed the first Dior dress designed by Yves Saint Laurent. But perhaps more importantly, it seems that Avedon also captured the spirit of the moment, the zeitgeist of those particular artists coming together. He captured an era in which youth reigned in fashion and design, inspiration was flowing in theater, cinema, and the circus, and photographic magic could be made by young dreamers just by finding the right location and borrowing an animal or two. I'll leave you with one final anecdote about this iconic image. At the opening of the 2001 San Francisco exhibition of pictures he made for Harper's Bazaar, Avedon stood before a large print of Dovima with elephants. "The sash isn't right," he said, shaking his head. "Not my best." There is nothing unusual about an artist looking back on a defining work and regretting that it isn't better. But at the same time, that self-criticism seems baffling. This image, with its astonishing juxtaposition of grace and power and its perfect summation of mid-century spirit, is undoubtedly an icon. Thank you.